Rich rancher pretends to sleep to test his servant. What she does next stunned him. In the lonely glow of a lamplit ranch house, a wealthy widowed rancher closes his eyes, waiting for betrayal. Silver coins glint on the desk. His pocket watch ticks loud in the silence. He wants proof that no one can be trusted. But when the servant girl steps close, she doesn't reach for gold. She kneels and prays for his broken soul. Her whispered words cut deeper than any blade. Soon, rumors swirl. A bitter brother rides into town with papers to strip the ranch away. Dark secrets threaten to ruin her name forever. The church bell tolls, hooves thunder down the frozen trail. A storm closes in. He thought he was only testing her. But what he discovers could cost him his land, his honor, and maybe the one chance at love he'll ever know. When the dust settles, will mercy save them both, destroy everything they've built? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind howled outside Kent Hale's bedroom window, its icy fingers scratching against the wooden shutters like a creature begging to be let in. The lamp on his desk cast warm shadows across the room, making the brass hands of the grandfather clock gleam as they crept toward midnight. Kent settled deeper into his leather armchair, his weathered face carefully arranged in what he hoped was a convincing display of slumber. The ledger book lay open on his desk, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers detailing the ranch's accounts. Next to it, his gold watch chain caught the lamplight, throwing little sparkles against the wall. Both items were carefully positioned, tempting bait in his trap for the new servant woman. Kent's chest tightened with familiar bitterness. 20 years of running the Double H Ranch had taught him harsh lessons about trust. Too many hired hands had betrayed him, stolen from him, lied to him. The wound of his wife's death 7 years ago had only deepened his suspicion of others, leaving him a hard man who expected the worst from everyone. Amanda May had arrived 3 months ago. A reference is sound, but her past mysterious. She worked harder than any servant he'd ever hired, never complained, and somehow managed to bring a whisper of warmth back to the cold halls of his ranch house. But Kent knew better than to trust a gentle manner and willing hands. He'd seen too many wolves in sheep's clothing. The floorboard outside his door creaked softly. Kent forced his breathing to remain deep and even, though his heart began to pound. He'd left his bedroom door ajar, another part of his careful trap. Through nearly closed eyes, he watched Amanda May slip into the room like a shadow. She moved with the quiet grace that marked all her work. Pausing just inside the doorway, the lamplight caught her plain calico dress and the simple bun at the nape of her neck. Her face, when she looked at his seemingly sleeping form, held none of the calculation or greed he'd expected. Instead, something like sadness softened her features. Kent waited for her to notice the ledger, to spot the gleaming watch chain. Any moment now, she would reveal her true nature. But Amanda May didn't move toward the desk. Instead, she approached his chair with slow, careful steps. "Poor man," she whispered, so softly he barely caught the words, carrying such a heavy burden all alone. To Kent's utter shock, Amanda May lowered herself to her knees beside his chair. Her hands, rough from honest work, clasped together as she bowed her head. The lamp's glow turned her brown hair to copper as she began to pray. "Dear Lord," she murmured, "please ease the grief that weighs so heavy on Mr. Hale's heart. I see how the loss of his dear wife still haunts him, how suspicion and loneliness have built walls around his spirit. Grant him peace, Lord. Help him find his way back to trust and joy." Kent's throat grew tight as Amanda continued her quiet prayer. Each gentle word fell like summer rain on the parched earth of his soul, stirring something he'd thought long dead. "Watch over him as he sleeps," she whispered. Guard his dreams from sorrow. And Lord, if it be your will, help him see that not everyone means him harm. Some of us truly want to serve you by serving him. Shame bloomed in Kent's chest, hot and uncomfortable. He'd set a trap for this woman, expecting theft and betrayal. Instead, she knelt beside him, asking God's blessing on the very man who doubted her. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner as Kent fought back tears that threatened to expose his wakefulness. Amanda rose quietly and moved to the chest at the foot of his bed. She returned with a worn quilt, one his wife had made in happier days. With tender care, she draped it across his shoulders, tucking it around him with the same gentle touch she used with newborn calves in the barn. "Rest well, Mr. Hale," she breathed and turned toward the door. Kent opened one eye fully, watching her retreating form. The lamp's glow haloed her simple dress and steady stride. Not once had she glanced at the ledger or the watch chain. Not once had her hands strayed toward anything but the quilt meant to warm him. The door clicked softly shut behind her. Kent sat motionless in his chair, the quilt warm across his shoulders, his heart hammering with something very different from suspicion. The wind still moaned outside his window, but it no longer seemed so bitter. The bedroom no longer felt quite so empty. His gaze fell on the ledger and watch chain, the trap he'd laid that had caught him instead. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the quiet house. Each strike seemed to ring with accusation. Marking the moment Kent Hale realized how far he'd fallen into darkness and distrust. Amanda, May's whispered prayer, echoed in his mind. Help him. See that not everyone means him harm. The tears he'd been fighting slipped free at last, tracking down his weathered cheeks. How long had it been since anyone had prayed for his healing rather than his wealth? How many years had he spent expecting betrayal, only to be betrayed by his own bitter heart? The quilt around his shoulders still held the warmth of Amanda's caring touch. Kent reached up to grasp it, his fingers tracing the familiar pattern his wife had sewn with love. Perhaps it wasn't just coincidence that Amanda had chosen this particular quilt. Perhaps, like the prayer she'd offered, it was another sign of God's mercy reaching out through this humble servant's hands. Kent sat in his chair as midnight deepened toward dawn. The lamp burning low, his heart heavy with shame but lighter somehow. The ledger's neat columns of numbers no longer seemed so important. The watch chain's gleam had dulled. What shone brightest in his memory was the sight of Amanda May on her knees, asking God's blessing on the very man who doubted her. Morning light crept through the frost-trimmed windows of the Double H ranch house, painting golden squares on the long wooden table where breakfast waited. Steam rose from platters of flapjacks and thick slices of ham, the familiar scents mingling with fresh coffee that Amanda May had brewed before dawn. Kent sat at the head of the table, his usual stern, expression softened by the memory of last night's revelation. The ranch hands filed in, stamping snow from their boots and nodding their morning greetings. They took their places with the careful quiet that typically marked meals in the boss's presence. Amanda moved efficiently around the table, refilling coffee cups and setting out a fresh jar of preserved peaches. When she reached Kent's place, he cleared his throat. "Thank you, Amanda," he said, his voice rough but clear. "The breakfast is mighty fine." The words fell into a startled silence. Even the scrape of forks against plates stopped for a moment. Old Joe, who'd worked the Double H for 15 years, actually set down his coffee cup mid-sip. Kent hadn't offered thanks to any servant since his wife's passing. Amanda's cheeks flushed pink, but her voice remained steady. "You're welcome, Mr. Hale. I'm glad you're enjoying it." The ranch hands exchanged glances, but Kent ignored their surprise. He focused on his plate, though he caught the small smile that curved Amanda's lips as she continued her work. The morning sun caught her hair as she moved, reminding him of how the lamplight had turned it copper the night before. While she prayed after breakfast, Amanda gathered the men's torn winter coats that needed mending. Her needle flashed in the morning light as she worked, her stitches neat and strong. Kent watched from his study doorway as she hummed softly while sewing, her face peaceful. The sound reminded him of his wife, though the pain of that memory felt different now, less sharp, more bittersweet. Before the men headed out to check the south fence line, Amanda had fresh coffee ready. She poured it into their tin cups, steam rising in the cold air of the yard. Kent accepted his cup with another quiet thank you, noting how the simple words brightened her eyes. The ride to the south fence was long and cold, but Kent barely noticed the bitter wind. His thoughts kept returning to Amanda's whispered prayer, to the gentle way she'd tucked the quilt around his shoulders. He'd spent so many years building walls against betrayal, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, boss. Young Tom's voice broke into his thoughts. That section there needs some work come spring. Kent nodded, noting the weak spot in the fence line. But even as they discussed repairs, part of him remained back at the ranch house, wondering about the servant woman who prayed for healing instead of reaching for gold. Evening brought heavy snow, thick flakes falling silent and steady from a pewter sky. The warmth and light spilling from the ranch house windows seemed to glow against the gathering darkness. Inside, Amanda moved through the kitchen preparing supper. Her voice lifted in hymns that drifted through the house. Kent sat. In the parlor, ledgers opened before him, but largely ignored. He found himself listening to Amanda's clear voice, singing Amazing Grace, the familiar words carrying through the walls. Something tight in his chest loosened with each verse. The ranch hands gathered for supper, bringing the scent of snow and leather with them. Amanda's beef stew filled the house with savory warmth, thick with vegetables and rich gravy. Fresh biscuits steamed on the table. "Best cooking we've had since I signed on," declared young Tom around a mouthful of stew. "Begging your pardon, boss, but even better than old Mrs. Crawford, who worked here before." The other hands nodded agreement, and Kent found himself nodding too. "You speak truth there, Tom. We're fortunate to have Amanda with us." Amanda ducked her head at the praise, but Kent saw pleasure brighten her face as she moved to refill the breadbasket. The meal continued with more easy conversation than the ranch house had heard in years. After supper, Kent noticed the wood box running low. Without a word, he pulled on his heavy coat and stepped out into the snowy evening. The ranch hands watched through the window, amazement clear on their faces. As their boss carried in several loads of firewood, Amanda met him at the door during his last trip, her eyes wide. "Sir, you needn't trouble yourself. I would have seen to it." "No trouble," Kent said, stamping snow from his boots. "Weather's turning colder. Best to have plenty of wood inside." "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Amanda's voice was soft, shy. She helped him arrange the logs in the wood box, their hands nearly touching as they worked. Kent felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Later, the house had settled into evening quiet. Kent sat in his chair, by the fire. His Bible lay open in his lap, the familiar words of Psalm 23 before him. But his thoughts kept returning to Amanda's prayer from the night before, to her request for God to ease his grief and loneliness. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the house he could hear Amanda's footsteps as she finished her evening tasks. The sound no longer made him tense with suspicion. Instead, it felt like part of his home's heartbeat, as natural as the tick of the grandfather clock or the wind in the eaves. Kent ran his finger along the Bible's well-worn page. "The Lord is my shepherd," he read quietly. "I shall not want." The words seemed to carry new meaning, as if Amanda's prayer had somehow cleared dust from his spiritual eyes. Snow continued to fall outside, but the ranch house felt warmer than it had in years. Kent closed his Bible and leaned back in his chair, listening to the fire's gentle song. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt something like peace settle over his heart, as soft and healing as the snow blanketing his land. 2 days passed at the Double H Ranch, like water flowing in a steady stream. The bitter winter. Wind still howled outside, but inside the ranch house, warmth and purpose filled every corner. Amanda May moved through the rooms with quiet efficiency, her presence bringing life to spaces that had grown cold and neglected over the years. In the front parlor, she stood on a sturdy wooden chair, measuring window frames with careful precision. The old curtains, thin and worn from years of sun and dust, barely kept out the winter's chill. She'd discovered a bolt of heavy fabric in the storage room, and her skilled hands would transform it, into proper protection against the cold. The soft whir of her sewing machine filled the afternoon hours as she worked, stopping occasionally to hold the finished curtains up to the wan winter light. Each stitch represented her dedication to making the ranch house a true home again, out in the vast pastures. Kent Hale rode alongside his foreman, Tom Baker, their horses' hooves crunching through patches of crusty snow. The cattle huddled together against the cold, their breath rising in steamy clouds. "Fine-looking herd this year, boss," Tom said, adjusting his scarf against the wind. "Despite the early winter, they're keeping their weight proper." Kent nodded, satisfaction warming him despite the chill. "Best I've seen in 3 years," he agreed, studying the thick-coated animals. These cattle represented more than just livestock. They were the foundation of everything he'd built since inheriting the struggling ranch from his father 15 years ago. As the sun began its early winter descent, Kent rode into town for supplies. The general store's bell jingled as he entered, bringing with it a blast of cold air that made the other customers huddle deeper into their coats. "Telegram came for you this morning, Mr. Hale," Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, called out. She retrieved a yellow envelope from beneath the counter, her usual cheerful expression touched with concern. Kent's stomach tightened as he took the telegram. Only bad news traveled by wire in his experience. Finding a quiet corner by the seed displays, he unfolded the paper with steady hands that belied his unease. The message was from William Morton, the county seat clerk, Edwin Hale, filing contest stop claims rights. To Catherine's dowry land stop court date, set 1 month stop repair. Documentation STOP. The words hit Kent like physical blows. Edwin, his younger brother, whom he hadn't spoken 2 in 5 years, was trying to take half of everything Kent had built with his late wife Catherine. The dowry lands formed the heart of the Double H's best grazing territory. Kent's hands clenched, crumpling the telegram's edges. The old bitterness rose in his throat like bile, memories of Edwin's past schemes and jealousies flooding back. His brother had always resented Kent's success, had always believed their father had favored the eldest son unfairly. The ride home seemed longer than usual, his thoughts as turbulent as the snow that began to swirl around him. The setting sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and purple, but Kent barely noticed the beauty. His mind churned with calculations and worries. With the weight of old wounds reopened, by the time he reached the ranch house, evening had settled fully over the land. Warm light spilled from the windows, and through the glass he could see his ranch hands gathered around the supper table. Amanda moved among them, serving plates of steaming food. Kent hung his coat and hat, noting absently that the new curtains were already hanging, their thick folds shutting out the night's chill more effectively than the old ones had. The familiar sense of beef stew and fresh bread filled the air. But his appetite had vanished somewhere between town and home. He took his place at the table's head, responding to greetings with brief nods. The ranch hands, sensing their boss's mood, kept their conversation quiet and focused on their meals. Amanda, however, watched him with gentle concern as she served his plate. Kent barely tasted the food, though he made himself eat enough to avoid. Raising questions, his mind kept returning to the telegram, to the threat it represented to everything he'd spent his life building. The dowry lands weren't just property, they were Catherine's legacy. The future she'd wanted to secure for their children before God had called her home too soon. After the ranch hands had finished and drifted off to their evening tasks, Kent remained at the table, staring into his cold coffee. He didn't notice Amanda clearing the dishes, didn't hear her soft footsteps as she left and returned. The gentle clink of china brought him back to the present. Amanda had set a cup of fresh tea before him, its steam carrying the soothing scent of chamomile. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Hale," she said softly, "but something's troubling you fierce. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter to bear." Kent looked up, meeting her concerned gaze. In the lamplight, her eyes held the same compassion he'd witnessed that night when she'd prayed over him. For a moment, he considered brushing off her concern with his usual gruff manner. Instead, he found himself reaching into his vest pocket for the telegram. "My brother Edwin," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "He's filing claim on Catherine's dowry lands, nearly half the ranch's best grazing." Amanda sat in the chair beside him, accepting the telegram with careful hands. Her brow furrowed as she read the terse message. "Your brother. He believes he has right to your late wife's property. He believes he has right to everything I own," Kent said bitterly. "Always has. Thinks our father cheated him by leaving me the main ranch house and buildings. Now he's found some legal trick to try taking Catherine's portion too." Amanda was quiet for a moment, her fingers smoothing the crumpled telegram. "The courts, they'll see justice done, won't they?" Kent sighed heavily. "Courts see what clever lawyers show them. Edwin's got a way of twisting truth until it serves his purpose. Been doing it since we were boys." "Then we'll pray," Amanda said simply. "The Lord knows what's right and true. He won't abandon those who trust in Him." Her quiet faith touched something in Kent's troubled heart. "I appreciate the sentiment, Amanda, but Edwin's determination to destroy me runs deeper than law or prayer. I've seen what he's capable of when greed drives him." Amanda reached out, her hand stopping just short of touching his arm. "God's capability runs deeper still. Mr. Hale, I've seen his work in the darkest places." Looking at her earnest face, Kent felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. Amanda had found safety and purpose at the Double H, had begun creating a real home here. Now, Edwin's schemes threatened to destroy that too. His brother's spite wouldn't stop at property. He'd use anything, anyone, to hurt Kent. "Thank you for the tea," Kent said quietly, "and the listening ear. But this is my burden to bear." Amanda stood, gathering the telegram with gentle hands. "No burden is meant to be carried alone. Mr. Hale, I'll add this matter to my prayers, if you don't mind." As she turned to go, Kent watched her steady movements in the lamplight. She'd brought such peace to his home in such a short time. Thought of Edwin's bitterness touching that peace made his chest ache with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected to feel. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, marking time's relentless march toward the coming court battle. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Kent sat alone at the long table, Amanda's words about prayer and trust echoing in his mind. Warring with his fear of the storms gathering on his horizon, morning arrived. With startling clarity after days of snow, the sun painted the frost-covered prairie in shades of diamond and gold. Inside the ranch house kitchen, Amanda shaped loaves of bread with practiced hands, the warm scent of yeast filling the air. Each gentle press of her fingers left dimples in the soft dough as she hummed an old hymn. Through the window, she watched Kent mount his stallion and ride toward the north pasture with his foreman, Jake Miller. The two men cut sharp figures against the brilliant sky, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Amanda slid the bread pans into the oven, then began preparing a basket for the men's lunch. She wrapped thick slices of yesterday's bread around salted beef, added apples from the cellar, and filled a large thermos with hot coffee. The kitchen's warmth wrapped around her like a familiar quilt as she worked. Out in the north pasture, Kent and Jake found trouble. A black-faced calf lay sprawled in the snow, its mother pacing nearby with anxious lows. Jake dismounted first, his weathered face grim as he examined the struggling animal. "Won't last long like this," Jake said, straightening up. "Can't even stand. Better put it down now than let it suffer." Kent frowned, studying the calf's labored breathing. Before he could respond, the crunch of approaching footsteps drew his attention. Amanda appeared, carrying her laden basket, her cheeks pink from the cold walk across the pasture. "I brought your lunch," she called, but her words trailed off as she noticed the scene before her. Setting the basket aside, she approached the calf slowly, her skirts brushing through the crusty snow. "What ails it?" she asked softly, kneeling beside the animal. Her gentle hands moved over its body, checking for injuries. "Nothing we can fix," Jake replied. "Sometimes they just fail to thrive." Nature's way. Amanda's face set with quiet determination. "If I might try something?" She looked to Kent for permission, her eyes bright with purpose. Kent hesitated, remembering other calves they'd lost over the years. His practical side said Jake was right, a bullet would be mercy. But something in Amanda's expression stopped him from saying no. "What do you need?" "Warm milk, blankets, and time," she answered. Already shrugging off her heavy shawl to cover the shivering calf, Kent nodded to one of the ranch hands. "Fetch what she needs from the barn." While they waited, Amanda spoke softly to the calf, her hand stroking its neck in a steady rhythm. The mother cow watched from a few yards away, shifting anxiously. When the supplies arrived, Amanda mixed the warm milk in a shallow pan, supporting the calf's head as she coaxed it to drink. "There now," she murmured, "just a little at a time. The good Lord didn't create you to give up so easy." Kent watched her work, something stirring in his chest. Catherine had been like this, gentle but stubborn when it came to saving sick animals. She'd spent countless nights in the barn, refusing to let nature take its course without a fight. "I'll stay with it," Amanda said, looking up at Kent. "Through the night, if need be. We can make a space in the barn." Jake shook his head. "Miss." "Amanda, that's a waste of let her try," Kent interrupted. The words surprised him as much as his foreman. "Have the boys help her set up what she needs in the barn." The rest of the day passed in a blur of regular ranch work, but Kent found his thoughts returning to the barn. As evening approached, he walked down to check on Amanda. He found her seated on a stool beside the calf, which lay wrapped in blankets on fresh straw. A lantern cast warm light over the scene. "Any change?" he asked quietly. Amanda looked up, fatigue evident in her face, but determination still bright in her eyes. "It's drinking better now. The breathing's easier too. Needs someone to believe in it, I reckon." Kent settled onto a hay bale nearby. "Reminds me of my wife, what you're doing." Catherine would spend nights out here with sick animals, said every life was worth fighting for. "She sounds like a wise woman," Amanda replied softly. "Did she save?" "Many, more than her share." Kent's voice roughened with memory. "Lost some too, but she never let that stop her trying with the next one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the calf's steadier breathing and the rustle of wind around the barn. Finally, Kent stood. "You should get some rest. I can watch it for a spell." Amanda shook her head. "Thank you kindly, but I made a promise to this little one. I aim to keep it." Kent nodded, understanding. Before leaving, he brought her a fresh thermos of coffee and another blanket. The night settled deep and cold around the ranch. stars sharp as chips of ice in the black sky. When dawn painted the eastern horizon in pale gold, Kent returned to the barn. He found Amanda dozing against a post, her hand still resting on the calf's neck. As he watched, the calf stirred, then struggled to its feet on wobbly legs. Amanda woke instantly, her tired face breaking into a joyful smile. "Look at you," she whispered to the calf. "Knew you had it in you." The calf took a few uncertain steps, then found its mother's udder and began to nurse. Amanda's quiet triumph filled the barn like sunlight. She turned to Kent, her eyes shining with tears of exhaustion and happiness. "The Lord does provide," she said simply. Kent felt something shift in his chest, respect, admiration, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. This woman's faith didn't just live in prayers and hymns. It showed in her actions, in her willingness to fight through the night for a single struggling calf. Word spread quickly among the ranch hands. They gathered at the barn door, watching. The calf gained strength with each passing minute. Jake Miller removed his hat, shaking his head with a grudging smile. "Well, Miss Amanda," he said, "reckon I was wrong about this one. You showed us all something about not giving up." Amanda's cheeks colored at the praise. "The good Lord did the healing. I just kept it company." Kent watched her duck her head modestly, saw the respect in his men's faces. In just one night, she'd proved herself more thoroughly than any amount of cooking or cleaning could have done. These hardened cowboys understood perseverance, understood fighting against the odds. In Amanda, they recognized a kindred spirit wrapped in a gentle heart. Looking at her now, Kent felt shame for his own doubts, not just about the calf, but about her character from the start. Her faith wasn't a simple thing of words and wishes. It was as practical as a night spent on a barn floor, as real as a struggling calf finding its feet at dawn. The morning sun streamed through the barn doors, turning Amanda's hair to gold as she helped guide the calf and its mother out to the pasture. Kent stood watching, remembering Catherine's similar victories, seeing now how God sometimes sent echoes of grace when you least expected them. Sunday dawned bright and cold, the sun gleaming off fresh snow. Kent stood before his mirror, fingers fumbling with an unfamiliar tie. He hadn't dressed for church in years, and the starched collar felt stiff against his neck. Through the window, he could see Amanda already at the wagon, checking the blankets she'd laid across the wooden seat. The brass buttons of his best coat caught the morning light as Kent made his way down the stairs. His boots, polished to a shine rarely seen on the ranch, echoed against the floorboards. In the kitchen, coffee and biscuits waited on the table, Amanda's thoughtfulness again. She seemed to anticipate needs before they arose. Outside, there, breath clouded in the crisp air. Kent helped Amanda onto the wagon seat, noting how her simple blue dress and white collar suited her. She'd pinned her hair up beneath a modest bonnet, though a few strands had already escaped to dance in the winter wind. "Much obliged," she said softly as he handed her up. Her gloved hands held tight to a worn hymnal. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following the road into town. Frost sparkled on fence posts and bare tree branches. Other wagons and riders appeared along the way, neighbors headed to the same destination. Kent nodded at familiar faces, aware of curious glances at his companion. The one-room chapel stood, proud against the morning sky, its white-painted boards gleaming. Smoke curled from the chimney where the deacon had lit the pot-bellied stove hours before. Horses stamped in the hitching area, their harness bells jingling softly. Kent helped Amanda down from the wagon, then followed her up the wooden steps. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow across rough-hewn pews filled with townspeople in their Sunday best. Heavy coats draped across laps. Protection against the lingering chill despite the stove's efforts. They found a seat near the middle, nodding. to the Wilsons on one side and elderly Mrs. Peterson on the other. Kent could feel eyes upon them. The wealthy rancher who'd avoided services since his wife's passing now returned with his pretty young servant. He set his jaw, determined to ignore the whispers. The piano wheezed to life as Mrs. Miller began. The opening hymn, Anda opened her book, offering to share with Kent. His throat tightened at the sight of the familiar pages. How long had it been since he'd sung these old songs? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound! The congregation's voices rose around them. Amanda's clear soprano lifted pure and true beside him. Kent stared at the words, his mouth dry. Then, slowly, haltingly, he began to sing. His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper at first. But Amanda's steady presence gave him courage, and by the second verse, he found the old melody returning. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, the words caught in his throat. How often had Catherine sung this beside him? Yet somehow, Amanda's voice soothed the ache of memory. Her faith shone in every note. Simple and sincere, Pastor Matthews took his place behind the weathered pulpit, his Bible well-worn and familiar in his hands. His sermon today focused on forgiveness and faithful stewardship of God's gifts. Kent found himself leaning forward, the messages striking closer to home than he'd expected. The good steward, Pastor Matthews explained, doesn't just manage property and wealth. He nurtures the spirits of those in his care. He forgives as he has. Been forgiven. Kent felt Amanda shift beside him, her hands clasped tight in her lap. The pastor's words seemed to touch something deep within her, too, after the final hymn and benediction. The congregation spilled out into the winter sunshine. Kent found himself drawn into conversations he'd avoided for years. Old friends clapped. His shoulder welcomed him back. He noticed approving glances at Amanda, standing quietly at his side. "Good to see you in church again, Kent," Mrs. Peterson said, her aged eyes twinkling. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" They walked the short distance to the boarding house, where Mrs. Turner had Sunday dinner waiting. The dining room buzzed with conversation, plates laden with roast beef and potatoes. Kent pulled out Amanda's chair before taking his own seat. Earning more knowing looks from the other diners, to his own surprise, Kent found himself smiling as they ate. Amanda's gentle questions drew him into easy conversation about the ranch, the weather, the morning sermon. Her presence made everything lighter somehow, less weighted with the gravity he'd carried for so long. The sun hung low when they finally started the journey home. Amanda sat close on the wagon seat, sharing the warm blanket as their horse plodded through the snow. The late afternoon light painted the landscape in soft gold, peaceful and clean. "Thank you," Amanda said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper, "for taking me to church today. I've missed it something fierce." Kent glanced at her profile, noting the shadow that crossed her face. "Weren't you able to attend before?" She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Stepfather, he didn't hold with church going, said it was foolishness." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I used to dream of having a home filled with hymns instead of harsh words. A place where praise came natural-like, not hidden away." Kent heard the pain beneath her careful words, recognized the weight of secrets left unspoken. He didn't press. Her understanding some hurts needed time before they could be shared. Instead, he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, offering what comfort he could. They rode on in companionable silence as the sky darkened to purple. Stars began to appear, bright and cold above the snowy fields. When the ranch house came into view, warm lamplight glowed in its windows. A beacon of home. Kent helped Amanda down from the wagon, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. She smiled up at him, her face soft in the gathering dusk. Before turning toward the house, following her up the porch steps, Kent found himself seeing her differently. not just as a servant who'd proved her worth, but as a woman of quiet strength and deep faith. Someone who'd brought music back into his home without even trying. Someone who belonged here, perhaps as more than just a helping hand. He watched her move through the kitchen, lighting lamps and setting about evening chores with familiar grace. The house felt different with her in it, warmer, more alive. Like a home again, not just walls holding memories. Kent sat in his chair by the fire, listening to Amanda's gentle humming from the kitchen. The day's hymns still echoed in his mind, along with the pastor's words about stewardship and forgiveness. He thought about how Amanda had changed things here, not just with her work, but with her presence. How she'd drawn him back to church, back to community, back to something like hope. A week after the church service, frost painted the ranch windows in delicate patterns as Kent supervised the woodcutting crew. The rhythmic thunk of axes filled the crisp morning air. Wagon after wagon rolled toward the barn, loaded with split logs for the coming storms. Amanda moved between kitchen and smokehouse, reserving the last of autumn's bounty. Her hands worked steadily, wrapping salted meat in cloth and storing root vegetables in the cool cellar. The rich scent of beef stew simmered on the cook stove, promising warmth for the hungry workers. "Reckon we've got enough wood split to last." Through March, Tom, the foreman, reported, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Weather's fixing to turn mean if my bones ain't lying." Kent nodded, studying the steel-gray clouds gathering on the horizon. Get the men started on checking the fence lines. Don't want any weak spots when those storms hit. A horse's hooves thundered up the road, drawing their attention. The rider pushed his mount hard, sending gravel flying as he reined up before Kent. "Mr. Hale," the young man gasped. "Your brother Edwin's in town. He's got papers from the county. Seat legal documents. Says he's coming out here directly." Kent's jaw tightened. He'd known this confrontation was coming, but the timing felt deliberate. Edwin always did have a nose for striking when things were unsettled. "Much obliged for the warning, boy," Kent said, pressing a coin into the messenger's hand. "Tom, get the men their dinner. We may need clear heads this afternoon." Inside, Amanda looked up from her work as Kent entered. Flour dusted her apron, and worry creased her brow at his expression. Trouble coming. Edwin's on his way. Bess said another. Place for supper. Kent tried to keep his voice steady, but Amanda caught the tension. She nodded, already moving to fetch fresh linens and another setting of Catherine's good china. The afternoon light was fading when hoofbeats announced Edwin's arrival. He rode a flashy bay stallion, his clothes city-fine despite the dusty road. Two men accompanied him, likely lawyers, by their dress. Kent met them on the porch, his stance deliberately casual. "Brother, been a while." Edwin's smile didn't reach his eyes as he dismounted. Kent, looking prosperous as ever. "I trust you. Received my notice about the land claim." "I did. Didn't expect you to deliver the papers personally." "Oh, I have more than just property matters to discuss." Edwin's gaze shifted to the doorway where Amanda stood. "I see you've hired new help. How interesting." Something in his tone made Kent's shoulders tighten. "Amanda, would you show these gentlemen to the dining room? Supper should be ready soon." The meal began in tense silence. Amanda served efficiently, her movements careful and contained. Edwin watched her with calculating eyes, barely touching. His food, when she brought coffee, he finally spoke. "I must say, brother, I'm surprised at your choice of household staff, especially given your particular standards." Edwin reached into his coat, withdrawing a sheaf of papers. "Perhaps you're unaware of Miss May's background." Amanda's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. Kent frowned. "What are you implying?" "Simply that your servant's previous employment might prove relevant to our legal proceedings." Edwin's voice dripped false concern. After all, testimony from someone with connections to certain establishments. Establishments of questionable repute might not carry much weight in court. What establishments? Kent demanded. Even? As Amanda's face went pale, Edwin spread several documents across the table. The Silver Dollar Saloon in Tulsa, for one. Not exactly a place for respectable women, wouldn't you agree? That's not. I never chose. Amanda's protest came out barely above a whisper. The papers suggest otherwise, my dear. Edwin's smile was cruel. 3 months' employment, room and board provided. Rather damning evidence when discussing matters of character, don't you think? Kent stared at the documents, then at Amanda. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she held herself straight. Mr. Hale, please. I can explain. I'm sure you can. Edwin cut in smoothly. But will a judge believe you? Will my dear brother? After all, Kent's always been particular about reputation. Wouldn't want scandal touching his precious ranch. That's enough. Kent's voice cracked like a whip. You've said your piece, Edwin. Now state your business and be done. Edwin gathered his papers unhurriedly. Simply this. I claim half interest in Catherine's dowry lands as her closest living relative after you. The court date is set for next month. I thought you should know what kind of testimony might be presented. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Consider carefully whose word you stake your case on, brother. The lawyers rose. With Edwin nodding coolly, Amanda moved to show them out, but Kent waved her back. He walked his brother to the door himself, every line of his body rigid with anger. Edwin paused on the porch. One more thing. I'm staying in town until the hearing. Do give my regards to your servant. The way he said the word made it sound like something Dirty Dots. Kent watched them ride away, their horses' hooves fading into the gathering dark. When he returned to the dining room, Amanda stood by the fireplace, her arms wrapped tight around herself. Mr. Hale, she began, but Kent held up his hand. Not now. His voice came out harsher than he meant. I need to think. He strode to his study, closing the door firmly. Through the thick oak, he heard Amanda's soft footsteps retreating to the kitchen. The fire had burned low when he finally looked up from Edwin's papers. Every word seemed designed to cast shadows, to twist what might be innocent into something sordid. Sleep refused to come that night. Kent lay in his bed, listening to the wind rise outside. Snow began falling again, thick flakes visible in the lamplight. Tomorrow would bring hard questions, harder answers. Trust warred with suspicion in his heart, Edwin's insinuations echoing against memories of Amanda's quiet faith in the distance. A coyote called a lonely sound that seemed to mirror the ache in Ken's chest. He thought of Amanda's gentle hands tending the sick calf, her clear voice raised in hymns at church. Could someone with such genuine goodness harbor the kind of past Edwin suggested? The snow fell harder, driven by rising wind. Winter storms were coming right enough. But the storms outside seemed mild compared to the tempest building in Ken's heart. Morning dawned gray and bitter. Frost etched delicate patterns across the window panes, and the barn cats huddled close to the kitchen, door seeking warmth. Amanda rose early, as always, but her movements in the kitchen lacked their usual quiet joy. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with its rich aroma. Yet the comfort it usually brought felt hollow. Kent entered the kitchen just as Amanda finished setting out breakfast. Their eyes met briefly before both looked away, the weight of last night's revelations hanging heavy between them. We need to ride into town, Kent said, his voice carefully neutral. The county clerk's office opens at 9 o'clock. Amanda nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her apron. Yes, sir. I'll be ready. The wagon ride into town stretched long and silent. Frozen ruts in the road made the journey rough, each jolt emphasizing the distance between them. Amanda sat straight and still, her face pale but composed. Kent kept his eyes on the team of horses, their breaths streaming white in the cold morning air. Main Street was quiet when they arrived, most folks sensibly staying indoors against the chill. The clerk's office occupied a small room in the courthouse basement, warm from a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Mr. Peterson, the clerk, looked up from his ledgers as they entered, his wire-rimmed spectacles fogging slightly in the temperature change. "Mr. Hale, Miss May." He greeted them, standing. "I expected you might come by today." Kent removed his hat, running one hand through his graying hair. "Edwin's documents. I need to see them." Peterson nodded, shuffling through a stack of papers on his desk. Yes. Filed them yesterday afternoon. Must say, they raised some questions in my mind." He extracted several sheets, adjusting his spectacles. "The employment records particularly. Paper's good quality, but the letterhead, well, something seems off about it." Amanda stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "May I see?" The clerk handed her the papers. Her fingers trembled slightly as she examined them. "This isn't right," she whispered. "The dates are wrong. I wasn't there for 3 months. It's only 3 days before I managed to leave." Kent moved closer, studying the documents over her shoulder. The ink seemed fresh, the signatures too crisp for papers supposedly 5 years old. "Peterson, what's your professional opinion?" The clerk cleared his throat. "Well, now, I can't make any official statements, but," he lowered his voice, "I've seen plenty of legitimate documents in my time. These have irregularities. The notary stamp, for instance, it's dated when that particular notary was actually bedridden with fever. I remember because his wife came to file papers for him that month." Hope flickered briefly in Amanda's eyes, but Kent's expression remained guarded. He gathered the papers, tucking them carefully into his coat. "Much obliged for your time, Peterson." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of more snow. Kent helped Amanda into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. They rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them. Finally, Kent spoke, his voice low but firm. "I need the truth, Amanda. All of it." Amanda's hands twisted in her lap. She stared straight ahead at the winter-brown prairie, gathering courage. "My mother died when I was 16, she began. Father remarried within the year. My stepfather, she swallowed hard. He was cruel, made advances. When I refused him, he beat me." Kent's hands tightened on the reins. The horses plodded steadily onward as Amanda continued. "I ran away one night with nothing but the clothes I wore. Walked until I reached Tulsa. A woman found me sleeping in an alley, took me to what she called a boarding house." Tears slid down Amanda's cheeks, freezing in the cold air. "I didn't know what kind of place it was at first. When I realized, I prayed for deliverance. A church missionary helped me escape after 3 days. She got me placed with a good family in Kansas, where I learned proper housekeeping. The wagon creaked through a frozen creek bed." Kent remained silent, processing her words. "I've never—" Amanda's voice broke. "I never did anything shameful there. About the very association." She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "I understand if you can't trust me now, if you need me to leave." Kent stared at the road ahead, his thoughts churning like the clouds above. Everything he knew about Amanda, her gentleness with animals, her devotion to prayer, her honest work warred against the scandal Edwin threatened to unleash. His position in the community, the ranch's reputation, the memory of Catherine's family name, all hung in the balance. They reached the ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened. Amanda went straight to the kitchen to prepare supper, while Kent retreated to his study. The usual evening sounds filtered through the house, pots clinking, the crack of kindling being added to the fire. Boot steps as the ranch hands came in from their work. Supper that night was a quiet affair. The ranch hands sensed the tension and ate quickly before escaping to the bunkhouse. Amanda moved about her tasks efficiently, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed. As she cleared the table, her soft voice broke the silence. "Dear Lord." She prayed aloud, though her words seemed meant for her own heart. "Grant me strength to face whatever comes. Help me trust your plan, even when the path seems dark. Kent sat in his chair, watching her. The firelight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, reminding him of Catherine's grace in times of trouble. But Catherine's reputation had been spotless. This could destroy everything he'd built. Amanda finished her work quietly, then turned toward the back stairs that led to her small room. "Good night, Mr. Hale," she whispered. Kent didn't answer. He remained by the fire long after she'd gone, Edwin's accusations battling with the evidence of his own eyes and heart. The clerk's doubts about the documents offered hope, but would that be enough to prevent scandal? Could he risk everything on the word of a woman with such a past? Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves. The house felt colder somehow, despite the crackling fire. In the empty room, Kent's doubts loomed large as shadows on the wall. While upstairs, Amanda's muffled prayers continued long into the night. 2 endless weeks crept by at the Hale Ranch. Heavy snow blanketed the hills, turning the world white and silent. Drifts piled against fence posts and barns, while bitter winds howled through every crack. The weather sealed them in like a tomb. Roads vanishing under pristine white that no wagon could breach. Inside the ranch house, the silence felt even deeper. Amanda moved through her duties like a ghost, speaking only when necessary. Her steps were quiet on the wooden floors as she carried firewood, cooked meals, and tended to the endless work of keeping the household running through the harsh winter. Whether Kent watched her from corners and doorways, his face set in hard lines. When she entered a room, he often found reason to leave it. At mealtimes, he focused on his plate, refusing to meet her gaze. The ranch hands noticed the change, exchanging worried glances across the table. Every morning, Amanda rose before dawn to kindle fires and prepare breakfast. Her hands stayed busy, mending torn shirts, darning socks, rolling out biscuit dough. In the barn, she doctored a lame mule and bottle-fed to orphaned lambs, singing hymns softly to soothe them. But Kent's coldness cut deeper than any winter wind. Each dismissal, each turned shoulder, each silence were kind words used to be. They all added to the ache in her heart. Still, she pressed on, taking comfort in honest work and prayer. One bitter night, as Amanda carried fresh linens past Kent's study, she heard his voice through the half-closed door. The lamp cast his shadow on the wall as he paced, muttering darkly to himself. "Fool to trust so easily," he growled. "Catherine would never have, but no. Betrayal comes in many forms. Should have known better than to let a stranger so close to hearth and home." Amanda's arms tightened around the linens, her chest constricting at his words. She hurried up the back stairs to her small room, where a single candle burned on the simple wooden table. Sitting at the table, she pulled out paper and pen with trembling hands. The letter took shape slowly as she poured out her heart. "Dear Mr. Hale, I write this knowing you may never read it, but truth demands voice. Yes, I fled to a place of ill. Repute not by choice, but in desperate flight from evil. Yet God preserved me, body and soul, allowing me escape before harm was done. I have lived honestly since. Trying to build a life of service and prayer, your suspicion pains me deeply, yet I understand its roots. You have suffered loss and betrayal. But I beg you to look at my actions, not just Edwin's accusations. Have I ever given you cause to doubt my character? Have I not worked faithfully, treated all with respect, and sought to honor God in all things? I pray daily for your heart to find peace, whether I remain here or must go. May God grant you clarity to see truth from lies, and courage to choose mercy over judgment, with respect and hope. Amanda May. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her worn Bible. Tears fell silently as she knelt beside her bed to pray. The next morning dawned gray and threatening. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, and more clouds gathered on the horizon. Amanda was kneading bread dough when hoofbeats approached the house. Through the window, she saw a rider bundled against the cold, his horse's breath steaming in the frigid air. Kent met the man at the door, taking a sealed envelope. The rider didn't linger, turning his horse back toward town before the weather worsened. Amanda watched Kent's face as he read the message, saw the color drain from his cheeks, followed by an angry flush. "Mr. Hale," she ventured softly, "is everything all right?" He crumpled the paper in his fist, eyes blazing. "The judge has made his provisional ruling in Edwin's favor." His voice shook with rage. Years of honest work, Catherine's family legacy, all at risk because he turned on Amanda suddenly. Because I allowed scandal under my roof. Allowed my judgment to be clouded by a woman with a corrupt past. Amanda stepped back, feeling as if he'd struck her. "Sir, please, no." Kent's voice cut like ice. "I've been blind. Edwin was right. Your very presence here brings shame. Any association with your kind, it weakens my position, threatens everything I've built." Tears welled in Amanda's eyes, but she held herself straight. "My kind," she whispered. "You mean those who have suffered, fled evil, sought honest work and God's mercy." "I mean those who've dwelt in places of sin," Kent snapped. "However briefly, however unwillingly, the taint remains." Amanda looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the man who had begun to trust her, but someone twisted by fear and pride. Without a word, she turned and climbed the stairs to her room. Her few possessions fit easily in a carpet bag, 2 dresses, some underthings, her Bible with a letter inside. She put on her warmest shawl and came back downstairs, where Kent still stood by the study door. "I'll go to the line shack near the creek," she said quietly, "until the weather clears enough for travel. I wouldn't want my presence here to further damage your case." Kent said nothing, his face like stone, as she walked to the door. Snow was starting to fall again as Amanda stepped outside, delicate flakes swirling in the wind. She paused on the porch, adjusting her shawl against the cold. Without looking back, she set off down the trail toward the line shack. The snow slowly erased her footprints as she walked away from the only real home she'd known in years. Her tears froze on her cheeks, but she held her head high, trusting God would show her the next step of her journey. From the study window, Kent watched her figure grow smaller, disappearing into the swirling white. The house already felt colder, emptier, but he hardened his heart against the guilt rising in his chest, telling himself it was necessary. Better to lose one servant than risk losing everything. The snow continued to fall, drawing a white curtain between past and future, between trust and fear, between 2 souls who had begun to heal each other before doubt tore them apart. The ranch house settled into a heavy silence after Amanda's departure. The warmth seemed to seep out despite the crackling fire in the hearth. Kent sat alone at the long wooden table, his spoon scraping against the bowl of stew he'd barely touched. His eyes kept drifting to Amanda's empty chair, the space she'd filled with quiet grace now, a void that accused him. The ranch hands filed in for their evening meal, their usual chatter muted. They served themselves from the pot Amanda had prepared. That morning, her last gift to the household. The biscuits were getting cold, and no fresh ones would replace them. "Storm's coming in hard, Mr. Hale," Tom, the foreman, said, breaking the uncomfortable quiet. "Might be the worst one yet this winter." Kent merely nodded, pushing away his half-full bowl. The men exchanged worried glances. They'd watched their Boss softened over the past weeks, showing glimpses of the man he'd been before. Grief hardened him. Now that light was gone, replaced by something darker than before. After the men retired to the bunkhouse, Kent paced the empty kitchen. The copper pots hung silent where Amanda had kept them polished bright. Her apron still hung on its peg, forgotten in her hasty departure. He touched the worn fabric, remembering how she'd hummed hymns while working, her voice lifting hearts. Even on the coldest days, his boots echoed on the wooden stairs as he climbed to the second floor. Passing Amanda's room, he paused. The door stood slightly ajar, lamplight from the hall spilling across the simple furnishings. The bed was neatly made, corners tucked with precision. On the small table beside it lay her Bible, its leather cover. Worn smooth with use, Kent stepped inside, his heart heavy. He hadn't meant to drive her away with nothing, not even her most precious possession. Picking up the Bible, he noticed a folded paper tucked between its pages. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, recognizing Amanda's careful handwriting, as he read her words. Each line struck his heart like a hammer on hot iron, her confession of fleeing evil, her testament to God's protection, her faithful service despite his doubts, all laid bare with honest humility. But it was her daily prayers that broke him. She'd prayed for his peace, for healing of his wounded spirit, even as he turned cold toward her. Near the end, one passage caught in his throat. Each night I thank God for leading me to this place, for I believed my prayers for a safe harbor were answered. Yet now I fear that in concealing my past, I have betrayed the very trust I hoped to build. If you read this, know that my greatest sorrow is not in leaving, but in failing to be worthy of the home I dreamed I'd found. Kent sank onto the narrow bed, the letter trembling in his hands. Shame washed over him as he realized his cruel mistake. He'd let Edwin's poison cloud his judgment, seeing scandal where there was only survival, sin where there was salvation. Amanda hadn't brought shame to his home. She'd brought light, warmth, and renewed faith. She was the very answer to prayers he'd stopped believing would be answered. The wind howled louder outside, rattling the windows. Kent crossed to look out at the swirling snow, now falling so thick he could barely see the barn. The temperature was dropping fast, and the line shack where Amanda had gone was a good 3 miles away. It was a sturdy enough shelter, but it wasn't stocked for winter living. She'd have minimal provisions, possibly not enough firewood to last. Through a heavy storm, guilt churned in his stomach as he imagined her alone in the gathering dark, driven away by his prideful fears. The same pride that had kept him isolated for years, refusing to risk his heart again after Catherine's death. But Amanda had shown him a different way, one of mercy, trust, and faith in God's provision. The clock in the hallway struck 8 bells, its chime almost lost in the storm's fury. Kent straightened, decision crystallizing in his mind. He couldn't leave her out there alone. Whatever the weather, whatever the risk, he had to find her. Hurrying downstairs, Kent pulled on his heaviest coat and wool muffler. He strapped on his gun belt, not for Amanda, but for the wolves that sometimes grew bold in bad weather. Grabbing a lantern and some supplies, he headed for the barn. His horse nickered nervously as Kent saddled him, sensing the weather's threat. "Easy, boy," Kent murmured, checking the cinch. "We've got important work tonight." A blast of wind, as he led the horse outside, nearly staggered them both. Snow stung Kent's face, and visibility was down to mere yards. The sensible thing would be to wait until morning, but Kent knew in his heart that waiting wasn't an option. He'd already waited too long to recognize the blessing God had sent him. Mounting up, Kent turned the horse's head toward the creek trail. The line shack lay along its bank, tucked into a stand of cottonwoods. In good weather, it was an easy ride. Tonight, every step would be a battle. Lord, Kent prayed, his first genuine prayer in too long, guide us true. Let me find her. Let me make this right." The horse moved forward into the howling white, carrying Kent away from his warm house and into the heart of the storm. But for the first time since Amanda's departure, his heart felt lighter. He knew his path now, not just to the lined shack, but back to faith, trust, and the promise of renewed life. With the lantern swaying through the darkness, Kent pressed on. Each step carried him closer to Amanda and to the man he needed to become, the man who could set aside pride for love, fear for faith, and judgment for mercy. The snow filled his tracks behind him, but ahead lay the chance to rebuild what his doubts had nearly destroyed. The bitter wind howled across the darkened range, whipping snow into stinging clouds that cut visibility to mere feet. Kent hunched low over his horse's neck, squinting against the relentless assault of ice crystals. His mount plodded forward, head down against the gale, hooves breaking through deepening drifts. The familiar trail to the lined shack, normally an easy ride, had become treacherous. Every landmark was shrouded in whirling white, forcing Kent to navigate by memory and instinct. The creek should lie just ahead, its banks lined with cottonwoods that would shelter the small cabin. "Steady now," Kent murmured, his words torn away by the wind. His fingers, despite thick leather gloves, had grown numb on the reins. The lantern swaying from his saddle horn cast wild shadows through the storm. More disorienting than helpful. His horse stumbled, and Kent's heart jumped. The creek bank could be anywhere in this white chaos. One wrong step could send them both tumbling into icy water. He drew back slightly, letting his mount pick its way more carefully. The temperature kept dropping, and Kent's thoughts turned to Amanda. Had she found enough firewood? The lined shack was sturdy but spare, meant for occasional use by ranch hands, not winter shelter. Guilt gnawed him as he imagined her alone in the cold, driven there by his prideful suspicion. A sudden gust nearly unseated him. The horse whinnied in protest, struggling to keep its footing. Kent leaned forward, patting the animal's frozen neck. "Just a bit further, boy. She's got to be close." As if in answer to his prayers, a faint golden gleam pierced the whiteness. Kent straightened in the saddle, straining to keep sight of it. Yes, there it was again, a thin line of lamplight escaping through a shutter crack. The lined shack. Relief flooded through him as he guided his horse toward that precious beacon. The cottonwoods materialized out of the storm, their branches creaking under loads of snow. The cabin's dark shape emerged beneath them. A single window offering hope in the wilderness. Kent dismounted stiffly, his boots crunching in snow nearly knee-deep. He led his horse to the lean-to beside the cabin, where the animal would have some shelter from the wind. Working quickly with numbed fingers, he loosened the saddle and rubbed down the shivering beast with a blanket from his saddlebags. At the cabin's door, Kent paused. What right did he have to intrude after driving her away with his cruel doubts? But the storm's fury left no choice. Taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly. No answer came. Kent pushed the door open, bringing a swirl of snow with him as he stepped inside. The cabin's interior was dim, lit only by a struggling fire in the small stone hearth. Amanda knelt beside it, feeding splinters of wood to the flames. She wore her heavy coat, but still shivered in the cabin's inadequate warmth at his entrance. She rose quickly, pressing back against the rough-hewn wall. "Mr. Hale." Her voice wavered between surprise and wariness. Kent stood dripping melted snow, his coat white with frost. The warmth of the cabin, meager as it was, made his face tingle painfully. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the ache in his heart as he saw fear in Amanda's eyes, fear he had put there. "Amanda," he began, then stopped, humility choking his practiced words. What could he say to mend the hurt he'd caused? How could he explain that finding her letter had broken through years of accumulated ice around his heart? She watched him cautiously, hands clasped at her throat. The firelight caught the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "Why have you come?" she asked softly. Kent took a step forward, then stopped as she tensed. "I found your letter," he said. "In your Bible, I read your words about prayers answered and dreams of home." He swallowed hard. "About how you thanked God for leading you to the ranch, even as I," his voice roughened with shame, "even as I let suspicion poison what should have been trust." Amanda's hands dropped slowly to her sides. "I never meant to deceive you," she whispered. "I only wanted to leave the past behind, to serve faithfully where God had led me. I know that now." Kent brushed snow from his coat, buying time to steady his voice. "I let Edwin's accusations blind me to the truth before my eyes, the truth of your character shown every day in your work. Your kindness, your faith." He met her gaze directly. "I was wrong, Amanda. Wrong to doubt you, wrong to listen to evil. Whispers instead of the testimony of your life among us." Tears spilled down Amanda's cheeks. "I tried so hard to be worthy of your trust. You were more than worthy." Kent took another careful step toward her. "I was the one unworthy too, proud to see God's mercy sent to heal my home and heart." He drew a shaking breath. "I don't ask you to return as a servant, Amanda. I hope," he faltered, then pressed on. "I hope you might consider returning as a partner, someone to share not just the work, but the dreams of what the ranch could be." Amanda's eyes widened. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, tears flowing freely now. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney as the storm howled outside. In that moment of suspended time, Kent felt the weight of years of loneliness, of walls built against hurt, of prayers abandoned in bitterness. But he also felt hope, fragile as a candle flame, but growing stronger. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I ask for it anyway, along with the chance to prove myself worthy of your trust." Trust. Amanda's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Kent ached to comfort her, but held himself still, knowing she needed space to wrestle with her hurt and hope. The wind rattled the shutters, reminding them of the storm's fury beyond the cabin walls. Finally, Amanda lowered her hand from her face. Though tears still fell, a gentle light had kindled in her eyes. "I've prayed every day for God to show me his path," she said softly. "Even when you turned away, I kept praying, because I saw beneath your hardness to the good man waiting too. Be freed." She took a small step toward him. "How can I not forgive when he has forgiven so much in me?" Relief washed through Kent like a spring flood. "Then you'll return." Amanda nodded slowly. "Not as before," she said, "but as you said. As a partner, building something new, together." "Together," Kent echoed. Then, moved by a rightness he couldn't explain, he knelt on the rough wooden floor. "Shall we seal this new beginning with prayer?" Amanda's face lit with joy. She knelt beside him, and their voices joined, barely audible, above the storm's rage. They prayed for guidance, for healing, for wisdom to walk the path ahead. As their words filled the cabin, the fire burned brighter, as if reflecting the warmth of renewed faith and hope restored than the morning after the blizzard dawned bright and cold, the world transformed into gleaming white. Kent and Amanda rode side by side through the pristine snow, their horses' hooves breaking fresh trails. The ranch house emerged from the whiteness, smoke curling from its chimney where the hands had kept the fires burning. As they approached, door flew open. Ranch hands poured out onto the porch, their weathered faces breaking into grins at the sight of Amanda. "Welcome home, Miss Amanda," called old Joe, waving his hat. The others joined in with whoops and cheers that echoed across the snow-covered yard. Amanda's eyes glistened as she dismounted. "Thank you, boys," she said softly. "It's good to be home." Inside, the house already felt warmer, as if it too welcomed her return. While Kent stoked the fire, Amanda hung her coat and moved naturally to the kitchen, where she began preparing hot coffee for everyone. The familiar routine felt different now, not the work of a servant, but the care of a partner. "We've got 3 weeks until the hearing," Kent said later that evening, spreading maps across the study desk. "Edwin thinks he can claim the southern grazing lands through Sarah's dowry." But the original treaty lines tell a different story. Amanda leaned over the maps, her brow furrowed in concentration. "These markings here," she pointed to faded lines. "They follow the creek bed before the flood of 1872 changed its course." Kent looked at her in surprise. "How did you know about the flood?" "Old Joe told me stories while we mended fences," she explained. "He's been here since before your father's time." Kent nodded slowly. His testimony could help establish the original boundaries. He pulled out a stack of leather-bound ledgers. "We'll need all the grazing records, too, showing continuous use of those lands." For the next several days, they worked together sorting through years of documents. Amanda proved to have a sharp mind for details, organizing papers chronologically and noting important dates. Kent watched her work, amazed at how she could recall specific details from conversations with the hands that helped piece together the ranch's history. One crisp morning, Kent rode out to visit Thomas's many horses, whose family had grazed sheep. In the region for generations, a Navajo elder welcomed Kent with traditional courtesy, serving pine needle tea while they talked. "The boundary stones were set by my grandfather's people," Thomas explained, tracing lines on Kent's map. "They marked the old ways before paper laws came. I will speak of this truth to your judge." When Kent returned, he found Amanda had organized all the grazing records into clear sequences, marking relevant passages with careful notes. "Look here," she said excitedly. "The records show your father paid grazing fees to the Navajo Council every spring. That proves he honored the original agreements." Their evenings fell into a new pattern. After supper, they would sit by the fire, reviewing documents and sharing thoughts about the case. But increasingly, their conversations turned to the future. Dreams of improving the ranch, helping neighboring families, maybe even starting a small school for the Hands children. "Sarah would have liked that idea," Kent said one evening, his voice gentle with memory. "She always wanted to teach." Amanda touched his hand softly. "We'll honor her memory by building something good here." As the hearing date drew closer, hope grew stronger at the ranch. The Hands worked with renewed energy, knowing their home was secure. Even the weather seemed to favor them, with clear skies allowing them to gather the last pieces of evidence they needed. With 1 week remaining, Kent surveyed their preparation. Maps, documents, and testimonies were carefully organized, telling a clear story of rightful ownership and honest stewardship. But more than the physical evidence, he felt the strength of unity, ranch hands, neighbors, and Amanda, all standing together to protect their shared home. Each night, as Kent watched Amanda's lamp burn late in the study, he thanked God for sending him not just a partner in the legal fight, but a partner in building a future filled with purpose and love. Frost sparkled on the wagon wheels as Kent helped Amanda up onto the seat. The morning air held winter's bite, but the sky stretched clear and blue above them. As they rode into town, Amanda smoothed her best dress with trembling hands. The streets of Miller's Creek hummed with activity. Townsfolk gathered in clusters, their whispers following the wagon like autumn leaves. Outside the courthouse, horses crowded the hitching posts while their riders packed the wooden sidewalks. Inside the courtroom, oil lamps cast a yellow glow over the sea of faces. Edwin sat near the front, his suit pressed, sharp as a new razor. When he spotted Amanda, his lip curled in a knowing smirk. "Miss Amanda May," the judge called. "Please approach." Amanda's boots echoed on the wooden floor as she walked to the witness stand. Her voice stayed steady as she spoke of her stepfather's cruelty, the desperate flight to town, and the boarding house that hid darker purposes. "But I never gave in to that life," she declared, her chin lifting. I kept my faith and found honest work instead. Thomas Many Horses stepped forward next, his presence commanding respect. From his leather satchel, he withdrew a yellowed map marked with tribal seals. These boundaries were set by our grandfathers, he explained, pointing to clear markings that matched Kent's claims exactly. Edwin's face darkened as the evidence mounted. Kent reached for Amanda's hand, his fingers wrapping tight around hers. As they waited for the judge's ruling, the judge's gavel cracked against wood like thunder. These documents presented by Mr. Edwin Hale are clearly falsified. The court finds in favor of Kent Hale, with all contested lands remaining under his sole ownership. Edwin's chair scraped harsh against the floor as he stood, his face twisted with rage as he stormed toward the door, shoving past onlookers. The heavy door slammed behind him, leaving blessed silence in its wake. One by one, townspeople approached Amanda, offering kind words and warm handshakes. "You showed real courage up there," Mary from the general store said, patting Amanda's arm. "We're glad to have you in our community." Back at the ranch, the house glowed with lamplight and laughter. Amanda's beef stew bubbled in iron pots while fresh bread filled the air with heaven's own perfume. The ranch hands gathered around the long table, their voices rising in familiar hymns that hadn't been heard in the house for years. Kent stood. Raising his cup, "The Lord has shown his mercy today. He sent truth to light our path." His eyes found Amanda's across the table, and he sent an angel to restore faith to this home. Amanda's heart swelled as Kent walked to her chair and knelt beside her. "Amanda May, would you consider becoming not just part of this ranch, but my wife?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Together, they bowed their heads as the entire ranch family joined hands in grateful prayer. Their voices soft in the golden evening light. The church bells pealed across the valley, their joyful sound echoing off distant hills. Inside the whitewashed chapel, morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden light across the packed pews. Ranch hands sat shoulder to shoulder with townspeople, while children fidgeted in their Sunday best. Amanda May stood radiant. In a cream-colored dress, her eyes bright with happy tears. Kent Hale couldn't take his gaze from her as the pastor spoke of God's redemptive love and the blessing of second chances. By God's grace, the pastor declared, what was broken can be made whole again. After exchanging rings and tender vows, Kent and Amanda stepped out into the brilliant sunshine. Rice showered down as cheers erupted from the crowd. The newlyweds climbed into their flower-decorated wagon, waving as they drove toward their new life together. In the months that followed, the ranch house transformed. Where silence once ruled, children's laughter now echoed through the halls. Kent and Amanda opened their home to 3 orphan siblings, then 2 more young ones who needed shelter. The house filled with the sounds of small feet, bedtime stories, and evening hymns. One night, Kent paused in the hallway, watching as Amanda tucked the children into bed. The lamplight cast a gentle glow as she smoothed blankets and kissed foreheads. His mind drifted back to that first night when she draped a quilt over his shoulders and prayed for his hurting heart. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, "for showing me that love comes wrapped in mercy." Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.